Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Process. Today, I want to talk about a couple of reflection points that I've had this week that I think are really important for my journey and that I think I would love to share, and maybe they will be relevant for you too. So, I want to speak specifically around our environment and how important our environment is. Now, what I mean by this is what our days actually look like. Who are we spending time with? What are the environments or places that we're going to, that we are surrounding ourselves with? How are we being intentional or maybe unconscious about how we are setting ourselves up with our environment? Because at the end of the day, how you set yourself up or the environments that you put yourself in are going to have an impact on how you see yourself, on the thoughts that you have, on the way that you act, and on the way that your trajectory of life kind of goes, because we have a tendency, or we are wired as humans, to mirror the things that we see other people doing. It's literally called mirror neurons for a reason, because we see what others are doing and we copy that, we internalize that. And so if you are being unintentional about what your environment looks like and who you're surrounding yourselves with, that can have a really big trickle down effect on all other aspects of your life. Now, this is something that the first thing that I want to talk about was when I was a child. So I didn't have control over this, and it's not about blame or shame or any of that. It's just a point of reflection for me to go, that's really interesting. So a couple of years ago, my dad and I were on a walk, and we were talking about his philosophy around teaching. He was a teacher for 30 plus years. He was an amazing teacher. And one of his big kind of core principles was around how it doesn't actually matter what the grade that you get is. It matters the effort that you put in, and then it matters that you learn something. So even if you were to do an assignment, get it all wrong, he was always more focused on, well, do you know what to do differently next time? Did you learn? So essentially taking the failure or taking the mistake and applying it so that you can do something differently next time. And that is something that I am currently teaching myself as an adult. So when we went on this walk, we started talking about this, and he was confused because he said, well, I talk to you about this concept all the time. We were always talking about how failure is okay, and that you will learn things from when you fail, when you try. It's all part of the process, and you have to go through those steps in order to learn. But when we were having this conversation, he said that, and I was like, I don't remember hearing that. I don't remember that being a guiding principle of my life. I remember very early on being absolutely terrified to make a mistake and learning that I needed to fit within the lines, and that I needed to really strive to get it perfect. And that if I didn't get it perfect, something was wrong with me. I had failed. And this is not because my dad wasn't trying to teach me this lesson. What I realized during this conversation and reflecting on the past was that even though he was trying to teach me this, I was spending 8 to 12 hours a day at school, especially once I got to middle school and then into high school, because I was so heavily involved in all of these extracurricular activities like band, jazz band, choir, jazz choir, drama, basketball, all of the things. I was there at school because those would happen before school and after school. So I would spend sometimes from 7 a.m. all the way until 7 p.m. or even 9 p.m. at school. And as I've spoken about in a previous episode, the way that the school system is set up is not really to allow us to dive into our curiosity and to try things all different sorts of ways and problem solve in all these unique, crazy different ways. No, the school system is set up to teach us this is how things are done, and you will be graded based on how closely you can match the rubric that I have set out for you. That there is one specific way that is right, and all of the other ways are slightly less right or completely wrong. And so, even though my dad was teaching and preaching this concept, I was not learning it because most of my day was spent around a different environment where that was not the teaching. I don't ever really remember learning that it's totally fine to make mistakes. If you fail a test, who cares? Because now let's talk about what we've learned from it and let's do something differently next time. It was never that. It was do your assignment, hand it in, wait to get your mark back, probably 2 or 3 weeks where it's not even relevant anymore because you're now moving on to different things. And then you eventually get the mark back, and then that determines how much you know. And then you move on and you don't even talk about that topic anymore because the curriculum is set up in a way that you have to keep moving. You have to keep going and keep learning. So there's no time for the teacher to go back to that assignment from a couple of weeks ago and sit down with you and help you understand where you went wrong and what you can do better next time, and giving you another chance to do the whole assignment again. That maybe happened. I could probably count on one hand the times that happened in my entire schooling career, that whole period of my life. That was never the focus. The focus was learn, get tested, and then by the time you find out about that test, you've already moved on to the next thing. So 12 years of that in my schooling, plus then 6 years in university, I had so much exposure to this environment where mistakes mean something is wrong with you. Mistakes mean you have failed. Mistakes mean you're stupid. All of these different versions of this lesson that for me created this belief that I have to be good at everything or I can't do it. I can't have reps where I suck. That's not an option for me. I have to be good right away. So if I can't be good right away, I just won't do it and I'll just focus on other things that I can be good at right away. So really interesting for me to think about how different my dad's philosophy is from the typical schooling system. He also was in the schooling system because he was a teacher, but he would really push the boundaries and do things differently with his class. But because I wasn't with him all those hours of the day, I was in a different school and I was doing, I was being taught by different people. I learned different beliefs. Even though we had chunks of time in the morning and chunks of time in the evening, the vast majority of my environment was in a school. And so that had a massive impact on my development, on my beliefs, on my self-talk, on my perception of the world. All of those things were deeply impacted by that time in school. Now, of course, there were things that were great that I learned, and I had amazing friendships. And I really enjoyed school. I loved it because I was good at it and I fit in with what, they were looking for. So a lot of the times it went really well. Well, a lot of the time it went really well for me. But looking back on it now, I can see how much it contributed to this story that I have now spent the last 5 years dismantling and changing and challenging, still to this day, challenging this belief that I have to get it right. And that if I don't get it right, I have messed up and that it says something directly about me. So that's the first example that I had. I had another very minor example actually recently where, again, it caused me to sit back and reflect on what kind of language am I surrounding myself with, and how can I be more intentional with this because of how big of an impact I know it has. So recently I found a new podcast and I was really excited to give it a listen while I was on a drive. And about 10 or 15 minutes in, I actually had to turn it off. Now, it wasn't because the content wasn't interesting. I was enjoying the conversation, but there was this running through line that I noticed right away that almost pulled me back into an old story for myself. So they were talking about money and they were talking about how sometimes they'll go get a meal and they'll spend money on this meal and then the meal doesn't work out. It doesn't taste good. It wasn't what they thought it was going to be. And then essentially they have wasted money. So they would rather bring their own food so that they can avoid that loss. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. And actually, I think it's great to bring your own food, especially if you have nutrition goals or you have other things that you're trying to manage, or maybe you have allergies, whatever. Like, there's so many reasons why it actually is a great idea to bring your own food instead of buying something and then being disappointed by it. But the piece of this that really got to me, and that I actually had to stop listening, or I chose to stop listening, was because they were talking about how this meal that they bought was, say, $15-20, and how that was quite a bit of money, and that they were then wasting that money. Now, for me, I have an old story around this exactly, that any sort of money spent on food is a waste, and it is not something that you should be prioritizing. And again, I think I've maybe mentioned this on the podcast before, but that comes from my parents not really liking to eat out, because my mom would often get sick if she ate out. So for her, it wasn't a priority. It wasn't something that mattered a lot to her to eat out. She's also a fantastic cook. So for her, cooking at home is actually better, because she's going to make way yummier food and she's not going to feel sick. So it makes perfect logical sense to me why that was not a priority for her, and why she didn't really love spending money on that. She would rather spend money on other things like traveling. But for me, I love eating out. I love getting together with friends, going to get a coffee, going to get, a pastry or a nice breakfast. That is one of my favorite things ever, especially now in Australia, because the cafe culture is so huge and there's so many beautiful cafes. A lot of them are right on the beach. Incredible breakfast options. I love eating out for breakfast. I don't think I've talked about that enough on this podcast, but I do. And so for me, that is a huge area of value and something that adds immense joy to my life. But because I was raised in this environment where spending money on food was not really seen as a priority, I internalized that. And so for a long time, I would shame myself. I would keep myself away from spending money. Or when I did, I would feel so guilty about it because I felt like I was wasting my money. I have done a lot of work in this specific area to change my relationship with money, because it is such a fundamental part of what we do as humans. We have to interact with money on a daily basis. And so for me, healing my relationship with money and really orienting myself around what matters to me was extremely important. And so I've done a lot of work on that, where I don't talk like that anymore. I see opportunities to spend money on food as something that's going to make me really happy. And that includes not just buying things for myself, but I'll go out of my way now to buy coffees for other people or to shout someone for lunch, which, being completely honest, I would never have done in the past. I was honestly, if I look at it objectively, I was what people would probably call cheap, because of this story, because I had this belief that if I was spending money, I was on food specifically, I was wasting it. So I would choose the cheapest thing on the menu. I wouldn't get a drink. And I definitely wouldn't be spending money on someone else's food, because not because I didn't want to, be kind or generous, because I was like that in other areas of my life, but I couldn't even see it as a possibility when it came to food, because it felt like I was already letting myself down by spending money just for my little meal that I would get. And so I couldn't even conceptualize doing that for other people. So in the process of healing my relationship with money, I have been able to see this totally differently. And this is giving a whole lot of context for this podcast that I was listening to, but I think it's important because it really helps paint the picture that when I listened to this episode and when I listened to them talking about this and viewing $15 or $20 as a lot of money, that triggered that old story in my mind, because it is always going to be there. It's always going to be in my nervous system. Well, maybe not always, but it's an ongoing process for me to rewire. And I realized in that moment, listening to this is bringing me back to that old place that I don't operate from anymore. And I don't like how I feel when I'm in this space. So I had to make the decision to stop listening, because it was not helping me to move forward and to learn from a new and more abundant mindset, specifically around money. Now, this wasn't even the main topic of their podcast at all, but it comes back to this idea that your environment shapes your beliefs. Whatever you are surrounding yourself with is going to influence how you see things. And I am incredibly intentional now, especially when it comes to money, that I will not allow myself to be in environments where that is the conversation and that is the focus, because that is not the focus for me anymore. Now I am using money as a tool. Now I am looking for ways that I can use my money to invest in myself, to invest in my relationships, to spread joy, to give joy to myself, to really align my spending with the things that matter to me, which also means I have cut down on spending immensely in areas that don't actually matter to me. I used to spend money on, say, more plants for the house, which, I mean, you can see here, I do have a couple of plants and I love these. I've now had these for a few years because we haven't bought a plant in a very long time. Not to say that we don't value it, but it's just not as high on our priority list as other things. And there's lots of other examples, but all of this to say that now that I have gone through this process of really healing that relationship, I can't put myself, or I won't put myself in situations where I'm going to hear those old stories and that I'm going to get sucked back into that old way of thinking. So even though that was a really small instance, it's still the same principle of how important it is for me to be intentional with setting up my environment. Because at the end of the day, it's going to have an impact. It's going to change how you see yourself, whether you realize it or not. It is underneath the surface. It is there. And especially if it is something that, like for me, this story around money, it's a very old story. It's very tightly wound around my nerves, around my neurons. They are primed and ready to go when it comes to this topic specifically. So I have to be intentional. I have to be really mindful about what I am allowing into my space. Who am I surrounding myself with, whether that is in person or whether that is on Instagram or on a podcast, being mindful about what this looks like for me. So that's really all I have for today, was just a couple of points that I have been reflecting on when I am looking at my environment. I'm looking at how I could be even more intentional as I'm moving forward. But I wanted to share both of these with you in case they resonate. And if they have, I would love to hear from you. You can send me a message on Instagram or just leave a comment on this YouTube video. And if you have any other thoughts, please reach out to me. I love to hear from you guys and to hear about what has been resonating for you, what you're enjoying, what you would love to hear more of from me, because this is really a spot for me to digest my own thinking and to practice talking about these things that really matter to me and that are shaping my own beliefs in real time. So thank you for listening. I really do appreciate it so much. I hope you have an incredible rest of your day, whatever it is that you're doing. And I can't wait to see you in the next one.